The year was 1296, and Edward I sat on the throne of England. He had wanted to expand England to prevent a foreign power such as France capturing territories in the British Isles. However, he needed Scotland's allegiance, which had led to his campaigns to capture Scotland. The Scottish campaigns, the wars of Scottish independence between England and Scotland, began in 1296. The English were successful under the command of Edward I, having won victories at the Battle of Dunbar and at the capture of Berwick in 1296. By 1304, Scotland had been conquered Robert the Bruce and Edward II, but in 1306, Robert the Bruce seized the Scottish throne and the war was reopened after the death of Edward I. In 1307, his son Edward II of England was crowned as king. Bruce gained supporters. In 1313, Bruce demanded the allegiance of all remaining Bali, all supporters under threat of losing their lands. He also demanded surrender of the English garrison at Stirling Castle, one of the Stirling Castle most important castles held by the English, as it commanded the route north into the Scottish Highlands. It was besieged in 1314 by Robert the Bruce's younger brother, Edward Bruce, and the English decided that if the castle was not relieved by midsummer, it would be surrendered to the Scots. The English launched a campaign. The English could not ignore this challenge, and prepared and equipped a substantial campaign Edward II requested from England. Wales and Ireland, 2,000 heavily armored cavalry, and 25,000 infantry, many of whom were likely armed with longbows. The Scottish force, the Scottish army, probably numbered around 6,000 men, including no more than 500 mountain forces. Scottish infantry was likely armed with axes, swords, and pipes, and included only a few bowmen, the precise numerical advantage of the English forces relative to the Scottish forces is unknown, but modern researchers estimate that the Scottish faced English forces 1.5 to 2 or 3 times their size. The English march into Scotland in an effort to rescue Stirling. Edward continued to hurry his troops, which resulted in the troops marching 70 miles in 1 week. This poor decision-making by Edward led to horses, horsemen, and infantry becoming extremely worn out with toil, and hunters shortly before the battle. King Robert picked a flat field flanked by woodland known as New Park to set up camp for the upcoming battle. The woodland gave Bruce and his foot soldiers an advantage since the English were very adept at cavalry. The English start the engagement on the 23rd of June, 1314. 2 English cavalry formations advanced. The first was commanded by the Earl of Gloucester, and by the Earl of Hereford. They followed behind a smaller detachment of roughly 300 soldiers, led by Sir Robert Clifford and Sir Henry de Beaumont, who marched closer to the River Forth. Both of these detachments marched in front of the main fighting force. These 2 detachments were tasked with lifting the siege on Stirling. A Hereford-Gloucester force was the first to cross over the Bannockburn and march toward the woodlands that hid the Scots, following the death of Henry de Bohun at the hands of Robert the Bruce. The battle begins one-on-one combat. This charged at the English forces under Gloucester's and Hereford's command, who were treated struggling back over the Bannock. Robert Lord de Clifford and Henry de Beaumont, with 300 men at arms, made a circuit upon the other side of the wood, towards the castle, keeping the open ground. Thomas Randolph, 1st Earl of Moray, King Robert's nephew, who was the leader of the Scottish advanced guard, hearing that his uncle had repulsed the advanced guard of the English on the other side of the wood, thought that he must have his share. And second engagement begins issuing from the wood, with his division marched across the open ground towards the 2 of 4 named lords. The enemy has played an ambush, Ed on their weapons, and not fleeing, having utterly routed the squadron of the English fleet. The said 2 lords, some of the English fled to the castle, others to the king's. The English changed their position during the night. The English forces crossed the stream known as the Bannockburn, establishing their position on the plain. Beyond it, a Scottish knight, Alexander Sedan, who was fighting in the service of Edward, deserted the English camp and told Bruce that English morale was low and encouraged him to attack in the morning. The Scots advanced from the Scottish advance New Park. Not long after daybreak, Edward was surprised to see the Scottish pikemen emerge from the cover of the woods and advance towards his position as Bruce's army drew nearer. They paused and knelt in prayer. Edward reportedly said in surprise, "They pray for mercy, for mercy." "Yes," one of his attendants replied, "but from God. Not you, these men will conquer or die." The Earl of Gloucester had argued with the Earl of Hereford over who should lead the vanguard into battle. He had also tried to persuade the king that the battle should be postponed. This led the English attack king to accuse him of cowardice. Goaded by the accusation, the Earl of Gloucester advanced to meet the Scots foreign. Few men accompanied Gloucester, and he was quickly surrounded and killed. Armed broken and running for their lives, the English were gradually pushed back. The English are pushed back and ground down by the Scots' children. The English lawn moment attempted to support the advance of the knights, but were ordered to stop shooting, as they were causing casualties among their own. The English then attempted to deploy. The English attempt to flank the Scots, their English and Welsh longbowmen, to flank the advancing Scots foreign, but they were dispersed by 500 Scottish cavalry under the Marital Sir Robert Keith. It soon became clear to Aymer Devlins, King Edward flees in Giles Dargeton, that the English had lost the battle, and Edward needed at all costs to be led to safety, seizing the reins of the king's horse. They dragged him away closely, followed by 500 knights of the royal bodyguard. Once they were clear of the battle, Dargent turned to the king and said, "Sire, your protection was committed to me, but since you are safely on your way, I will bid you farewell. For never yet have I fled from a battle, nor will I now." He turned his horse to charge back into the ranks of Scottish, where he was overboard and slave. Edward fled with his personal bodyguard, and panic spread among the remaining A route, begins troops turning their defeat into a round, then pursued by James Douglas in a small troop of horsemen. Edward fled to Dunbar Castle, from which he took a ship to Berwick from the carnage of Bannockburn. The rest of the army tried to escape to the safety of the English border. 90 miles south, many were killed by the pursuing Scottish army or by the inhabitants of the countryside they passed through.